Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabe. I welcome you to Diffusion. All substances are made up of sub-microscopic particles called molecules. So we are looking at substances. Every substance that you see is made up of small particles, which we refer to as molecules. Here we have the solids. They are made up of tightly packed particles. You can see the particles are tightly packed over each other. We have the liquids. In the liquids, the particles are freely a little bit separated from each other, so there can be an easy flow. And we have the gases. For the gases, you can see that they are sparsely, far away distributed or spaced. So all substances are made up of sub-microscopic particles. Sub means small. Microscopic, sub-microscopic particles, which we call molecules. In gases like air, the molecules can freely move. So when you look at these molecules in air, they can move freely. They are far away spaced. They can move in any direction they want because they are far away spaced from each other. In liquids, for example, like water, the molecules are also free to move. So for the liquids, you can see that these molecules are somehow also free to move. They can move, but not very far away like those ones in the air or gas. In solids, the molecules are more or less stationary. So if you look at solids, you'll see that our molecules are tightly packed together. So they are more or less stationary. They are in one place, fixed in one place. The solutions, for example, sugar dissolved in water, the molecules of the dissolved substances can move. Now we know that sugar is a solid, but when you dissolve it in water, it is going to be moving because it is already dissolved in water. Therefore, it can easily move. But sugar is a solid. But when it dissolves in water, its molecules can easily move around. Representation of molecules in a gas. We want to look at the representation of molecules in a gas. As a result of their random movements, the molecules become evenly distributed. We know that for the gases, they are freely moved. They move in any direction. They can move in any direction. And because of that random movement, the molecules are going to move away from where they are concentrated, and you will find that they are filling the whole place. So now that is what we are going to see here. You're going to see that now from here they will diffuse and become like that. They will become spaced far away from each other because there is that random movement in gases. This movement is called diffusion. This movement is called diffusion. When they are moving from one region and they go on spacing and moving, that one is what we call diffusion. They have diffused. The scent of hyacinth diffuses through the room. Hyacinth is a plant and it gives off that scent. Now that scent is produced in one area, but because it is a gas, it diffuses through the whole room, and then the molecules are going to be distributed in all the room because they have diffused. The scent molecules diffuse from a region where they are concentrated, that is the flower, to a region where they are absent or in a low concentration. Now, if we look here, we can see here that in this region here, we have a high concentration of our scent molecules. So what is going to happen is that now these molecules are going to move to a region where their concentration is absent or where their concentration is low. So that's why we are seeing now these particles, they will come from this area where they are highly concentrated, that is in the region where they are being produced, and they will go to an area where they are absent or they are in low concentration. So that one is going to show us here that now we shall have something like this. And when you look here, you will see that all the particles are far away from each other, meaning that they have diffused from a region of their high concentration to a region of their low concentration until when an equilibrium is reached. In an area as large as a room, there will be air currents and conventional currents which will play a greater part than diffusion. So sometimes we may have air currents. Air is moving in the room, and when air is moving in the room, this air is going to move these molecules faster than diffusion would have done it. So there we shall know that now it is the air current or convection current that are playing a lot compared to the diffusion. One way substances enter a leaf cell is by diffusion. One way the substances enter a leaf cell is by diffusion. Enters or leaves the cell is by diffusion. Let us look here. Here we have the cornea. Cornea is found in the eye, that front white part of the eye. But that front part of the eye, the cornea has no blood supply. So its cells obtain oxygen by simple diffusion of air. So that white part of the eye in front does not have blood supply. So it gets oxygen from outside, and that oxygen diffuses through the eye. So here we have air here, and this is air containing high concentration of oxygen. Then we have this second layer here. The one covering the cornea is fluid, which is tear, a fluid surrounding the cornea. Now this one, the oxygen in the air diffuses into the tear, and then the tear becomes highly concentrated with oxygen. And now here we have the cell of the outer surface of the cornea. So you can see that now the oxygen diffuses from the atmosphere and it enters into the tears. Then from the tears it enters into the cell on the outer surface of the cornea. So now oxygen passes through the plasma membrane by simple diffusion. It passes through the plasma membrane by simple diffusion. So all this oxygen which is entering here, it is entering by diffusion. And when you look at oxygen molecules inside here, you will see that the lower concentration of oxygen in the cornea cell is due to aerobic respiration. Of course, inside here in the cornea cell, there is respiration which is taking place, which is causing the reduction in oxygen molecules. So when there is reduction in oxygen molecules and outside we have more oxygen molecules, we are going to create a concentration gradient, high oxygen out and low oxygen inside. So oxygen is going to diffuse from outside where it is highly concentrated, and it enters into a region where its concentration is low. And that one is what we are calling diffusion. If a substance is more concentrated outside a cell than inside, then the molecules will tend to diffuse into the cell. So we are saying that, for example, the substance we are talking about now here is oxygen. This substance oxygen is more concentrated outside of the cell than inside of the cell. So when you look at those bubbles there, those are the oxygen molecules, and these ones that you're seeing outside also, those are oxygen molecules. So where you see more oxygen molecules, that is where their concentration is high, and where you are seeing them few, the concentration of the molecule is low. So what is going to happen is that the molecules now are going to diffuse from a region where they are highly concentrated, and they move to a region where they have low concentration. So oxygen is going to move from outside, entering into the cell. Why? Because inside the cell there is low concentration of oxygen molecules, and outside the cell we have more concentration of oxygen molecule. We have created there a concentration gradient. If the substance is more concentrated inside the cell than outside, then the molecules will tend to diffuse out of the cell. Now suppose, let us say that, for example, here, because of the respiration which is taking place, we are producing carbon dioxide. Now this carbon dioxide we are producing is going to be more concentrated in the cell, and as it is more concentrated inside the cell, the carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out of the cell. Because we have more concentration of carbon dioxide outside the cell, so inside the cell, so what is going to happen is that now the carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the cell and it goes outside where the concentration is low or less concentrated. So carbon dioxide which has been produced inside the cell now will diffuse out of the cell. Why? Because there is high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the cell compared to the carbon dioxide outside the cell. The molecules are more densely packed on the left, so they tend to diffuse into the space on the right. This is a diffusion gradient. So when you look here, you will see that on the left we have more molecules compared to the right, and because of that, the molecules are going to diffuse from a region where they are highly concentrated, and they will move to a region where their concentration is low. That one is what we call the concentration gradient. We have created a concentration gradient. High concentration this side, and there is low concentration this side. So the molecules are going to move from a region of high concentration to a region of their low concentration. That one where we have one side has more concentration and another one has low concentration is what we call the concentration gradient. So particles will move from a region of high concentration moving to a region of low concentration due to the concentration gradient. The bigger the difference in concentration, the greater the diffusion gradient. So if we have more substances concentrated here and there are less or few molecules this side, that means that now we have a greater concentration gradient. And if we have a bigger difference in the concentration of the molecules on both sides, then we are going to cause a greater diffusion gradient. And that one will cause diffusion to be very fast. The concentration of oxygen molecules is greater outside the cell than the inside. So when we look at our cells here, we are looking at this cell at the moment. You can see that outside these red particles are representing molecule of oxygen. And when you look in the cell, we have few molecules of oxygen. So what is going to happen is that now the oxygen is going to diffuse from outside where the concentration is high, and they will diffuse into the cell where the concentration of oxygen is low because of the concentration gradient created between the cell and the outside. So, oxygen molecules diffuse into the cell. Oxygen molecules are going to diffuse into the cell. Now, when you look here, now you will see that the much concentration which was outside has reduced. Why? Because much of it has diffused into the cell. And when do we expect diffusion to stop? Diffusion is going to stop when the concentration inside is equal to the concentration outside. So there will be an even distribution of oxygen inside and outside of the cell. Then that's when the oxygen will stop entering into the cell. The concentration of carbon dioxide is greater inside the cell than outside. Carbon dioxide molecules will diffuse out of the cell. As we have said, that inside the cell there is a process of respiration taking place. And when that respiration is taking place, there is breakdown of organic molecules, biological molecules, glucose, and we end up producing carbon dioxide. So you are going to find that inside the cell, we have more molecules of carbon dioxide compared to the outside. So what is going to happen is that because of that high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the cell compared to the concentration of carbon dioxide outside of the cell, there is going to be diffusion. This carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out of the cell, and it go inside out from the cell, and then it will go out of the cell. Why? Because of the concentration gradient that has been created by respiration which is taking place inside the cell. So much of the carbon dioxide will diffuse from the cell and it goes outside of the cell. Because the cell is using up oxygen, the concentration of oxygen inside the cell is always lower than the concentration outside. So you will find that always oxygen is entering into the cell from outside. But again, you find that the concentration of oxygen is lower inside, yet oxygen is entering inside. Why? This is because as the oxygen enters inside, it is used by the process of respiration, which is producing carbon dioxide. So you'll find that the concentration of oxygen will always be lower inside the cell compared to outside. So there will be always diffusion of oxygen entering inside the cell. The diffusion gradient is maintained, and so oxygen continues to diffuse in, because we are seeing that inside we are having always oxygen entering into the cell. And as oxygen is always entering into the cell, and inside we are carrying out the process of respiration, which is producing carbon dioxide, and it is using oxygen, there will always be a diffusion gradient. It will always be like this. Why? because always outside there will be a lot of oxygen compared to the oxygen inside. Why is the oxygen inside lower? It's because oxygen that enters inside, most of it is used up by the process of respiration. Therefore, its concentration reduces inside. Yet outside, its concentration is high. That is why there is always a diffusion gradient maintained. And this makes oxygen to continue diffuse into the cell. The oxygen is used up in respiration, and carbon dioxide is produced by respiration. So we have seen that the oxygen which is going inside is going to be used up in the process of respiration. And when that oxygen is inside, it is going to be used, and then that process of respiration is going to end up producing carbon dioxide molecule. So meaning that inside the cell, the oxygen molecules will continue to reduce as the carbon dioxide molecules continue to increase because of the production that is producing carbon dioxide and using oxygen, which is respiration process. The concentration of carbon dioxide inside the cell is going to increase. So the carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the cell. So we have seen that the oxygen taken inside is used during the process of respiration, and when it is produced in the process of respiration, we end up producing carbon dioxide. And as carbon dioxide is produced in the cell, its concentration goes on increasing. And as the concentration increases inside the cell, the concentration of carbon dioxide outside the cell is very small. So outside we have less concentration of carbon dioxide, but much of the concentration of carbon dioxide is inside the cell. So what is going to happen is that this carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out of the cell because of the high concentration gradient created inside the cell and outside of the cell. All kinds of substances could diffuse into a cell. There would be a danger that poisonous substances could diffuse in and kill the cell. So, if all substances coming from outside would diffuse into the cell, there would be danger that harmful substances outside the cell would diffuse into the cell and will end up killing the cell if that one would happen. If all substances in a cell could diffuse out the cell, would lose essential substances like glucose needed to keep the cell alive. Now, another scenario, that if all the substances inside the cell, those substances were allowed to diffuse out all the substances, then that means that the cell will not survive. Why? Because, for example, if glucose now diffuses out of the cell and it goes outside, then the cell will not have substances that will produce energy to keep it alive. So it means that there has to be control of the substances diffusing out and those ones are diffusing in. There has to be the control. Control substances diffusing in to prevent poisonous substances entering into the cell, and control substances going out so that the cell does not lose essential substances like glucose, which are needed to keep the cell alive. In fact, although the cell membrane does allow some substances like glucose and carbon dioxide to diffuse freely, it controls the exit and entry of nearly all other substances. So we can see that oxygen can easily enter into the cell, and we can see that carbon dioxide, which is produced inside the cell, can easily diffuse out of the cell. The cell membrane will allow the carbon dioxide to easily diffuse out and allows oxygen to easily diffuse in. But it is going to control the exit of some substances. It may not allow the exit of glucose. It may not allow the exit of proteins. Amino acids may not be allowed to go out, but it will allow easily oxygen to enter and carbon dioxide freely to move out. But also it will not allow the entry of every substance into the cell, because some of the substances may be poisonous to the cell and they may end up killing the cell. For living processes, diffusion is effective only over a short distance. So in living processes, diffusion is effective for a shorter distance. If diffusion is taking place in a shorter distance, then it is effective. But if diffusion is to go a longer distance, then diffusion itself may not be effective. The distance from a cell membrane to the center of the cell may be 0.1 millimeter or less. That is, from the cell membrane to the center of the cell. That's where we are having 0.1 millimeters. So that is a smaller distance, and that distance diffusion is possible. Diffusion is rapid enough to keep the cell supplied with oxygen and food. So if the distance from the cell membrane to the center of the nucleus or the center of the cell is very small or short, there is going to be rapid diffusion because the distance is very short. Therefore, the cell can get supplies like oxygen and the food needed for the survival of the cell. a single-celled organism like an amoeba, the distance is so small that diffusion is rapid enough for the cell's need. So when you look at the amoeba, if you look at the amoeba is a single-celled organism. It has only one cell, and the maximum distance is between 0.1 millimeter from the cell membrane to the center of the cell. It is 0.1 millimeter. So here it means that the distance being short, diffusion of oxygen is very easy, and then also diffusion of carbon dioxide outside is also very easy and very fast, so that oxygen is supplied to the cell for the need, and then carbon dioxide produced can easily be diffused out of the cell because the distance is a shorter or smaller distance. Single-celled organisms are rarely more than 1 millimeter in diameter. So for the single-celled organism, it is rare to find that from one end to another end is more than 1 millimeter. They are not more than 1 millimeter from one end to another end. Bacteria range from 1 to 10 microns. That is 1 to 10 microns, and 1 micron is equivalent to 1/1000th of a millimeter. 1/1000th of a millimeter. 1 divided by 1,000 millimeters. That one gives you a micron. Diffusion is rapid enough for such small organism. So for such small organism like amoeba, diffusion is very fast or very rapid. Why? Because of the small distance from the cell membrane to the center of the organism. So diffusion can easily be used, and it is rapid because of the small distance. Inside the bodies of large animals, diffusion of oxygen into the cell is rapid enough. So in large bodies, diffusion of oxygen into the cell is also rapid. That is, diffusion going into the cells of large animals is also very rapid. For transport across the whole body, diffusion would be too slow. So to transport substances by diffusion across the whole body, diffusion would be very slow. But we have seen that diffusion within the cell, if diffusion is taking place within the cell, it is very fast. But if we have other cells, and those other cells also, they need diffusion of oxygen which is coming from here. It has to diffuse through this cell, then diffuse through this cell so that it can reach this cell. That distance is very long, and therefore here diffusion will be very slow. But the diffusion within a cell itself, that one is very fast. But the diffusion across the cells will be very slow. Large organisms have evolved transport system, that is the blood circulatory system. This carries oxygen from outside the body to the cell inside. So because of the diffusion distance being long, now large organisms have evolved transport systems, and these transport systems are the ones now that are going to transport oxygen inside the body from outside of the body. The earthworm diffusion takes place through the thin skin of the worm. So when you look at the earthworm, it has got a thin skin, and for that reason, because its skin is thin, then gases can easily diffuse inside through the skin, because the skin is very thin. The earthworm's skin is only 1 cell thick. So the skin of the earthworm is 1 cell thick. From outside to inside, to reach the blood capillaries, you pass through 1 cell only. So the distance from outside to the blood capillaries is 1 cell thin and 1 cell thick, meaning that oxygen can easily diffuse in, and it will be carried into the blood capillary. And then also carbon dioxide, which is brought, can easily diffuse outside. Why? Because the skin is made up of 1 cell only. So as the blood vessels absorb the oxygen and carry it to the body, this one here, then they will also release carbon dioxide, which will diffuse out of the cells. Therefore, that one is possible because it is only 1 cell thick. The skin is made up of 1 cell thick. To reach the blood vessels, the oxygen has to diffuse over a very short distance, and so is rapid enough to meet the earthworm's need. So for oxygen to move from outside, oxygen moving from outside to enter into the earthworm's body so that it is transported to all parts of the body is very small. The distance is very small. So that small distance can easily allow in the diffusion of oxygen to enter inside, and then it is transported to the all parts of the body. The single cell layer is an epidermis rather than a skin. So when you look at this layer here, it is the only layer to reach the blood capillaries. It is 1 cell thick. So instead of referring to it as a skin, it is in fact a epidermis, just a single layer of cells. The lungs are not hollow, but spongy. They are made up of thousands of tiny air pockets. So here now we have gone to human beings and animals. For us, diffusion is going to take place in the lungs. And when you look at our lungs here, this is the position where the lungs are found in the body. They are found in the thorax. That's where they are found. So if you pluck them outside and you put them outside, this is how they look like. On the sides here we have the lungs, and then the tube that takes to the lungs air is what we call the windpipe. Now in between the lungs, that's where we have the heart. Now below that, there is a curve here. This curve, it is where the diaphragm occupies. That is the separation of the thoracic region and the abdominal region. Humans obtain oxygen by diffusion, but not through the skin. So we also get oxygen by diffusion. But the diffusion of oxygen is not passing through the skin. It passes through the lungs. Diffusion through the lungs, but not through the skin. Diffusion is not going through the skin. Although the skin is well supplied with blood vessels, there are too many layers of cells for diffusion to be fast enough. We have already seen that one, that there are a lot of layers of cells. Let us suppose that we were going to get oxygen would diffuse through the skin and then it enters into the lungs. From the lungs to the surface of the skin, there are very many layers of cells. That means that when oxygen is coming outside, to diffuse through those layers to reach the lungs, it would take a longer time. So diffusion would be very slow. Therefore, even if the skin is well supplied with blood vessels, still there are very many layers of cells which would cause diffusion to be very slow. The windpipe, or what we call the trachea, divides into two smaller branches called bronchi. So let us first look at this one here. We have this one here. This is what we call the trachea or the windpipe. Now the windpipe is dividing into two smaller ones. These two smaller ones are now the ones that we call the bronchi. They are the ones that we call the bronchi, which continue to divide repeatedly into smaller and smaller branches until they end up in tiny, thin-walled air pockets. These ones we call the air sac. So when you look here, we have the trachea or the windpipe, and when it reaches here, it divides into two smaller ones, which we call the bronchi. Now the bronchi will come and again divide itself into smaller ones, which now we are going to call the trachea or bronchioles. Now those ones, the small one will continue dividing themselves until when they reach those sac which we call the air sac. Then they stop dividing themselves and they reach the point which we call the air sac or the air pockets. So that's how the windpipe, the trachea, divides into smaller bronchi, which further goes subdivide into smaller ones, which subdivides into smaller ones, and then those smaller ones divide themselves into, and they end up into smaller sac-like or pocket-like structures, which we call the air sacs. The air passages in the lung branch into finer and finer tubes. Each tube ends up in a cluster of tiny air sac. So we have seen from the big branch, which is the trachea, it divides and forms smaller branches, which we call the bronchi, and then those ones also, they go further and divide into smaller ones, and then those smaller ones, they continue to divide into smaller ones. Now those smaller ones, when you magnify them, those smaller ones now they will end up into the what we are calling cluster of tiny sacs, and those sacs are the ones now we have outside here. Those are our cluster of sacs, and those clusters of sacs are the ones that we are calling the air sacs. Air is carried to the air sacs by the breathing movement. So air is going to be carried to the air sac by the breathing movement. Now this one, what we have here, this is our single air sac. If we remove our single air sac, this is how it looks like. And air is going to enter into the air sacs by movement of breathing in. So when we breathe in and breathe out, air enters and then air also goes out. Now when you look at your sac, air sac, if you look at it outside, you are going to see it is made up of one layer of cell. It is one layer of cell. It is one cell thick. That easily allows the diffusion of gases. And then outside, we have a supply of blood to the air sac. We have the blood capillary, which comes outside of the air sac, and it supplies blood. Now that blood is the one which is going to absorb oxygen. Oxygen will enter into the air sac and it will diffuse into the blood capillary. And then the blood has brought carbon dioxide. Now that carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the blood capillaries and it diffuses through the epithelia of the air sac, which is one cell thick, and then it comes into the air sac, then it will be taken out. But this diffusion is brought about by the movement when we breathe in and breathe out. It is the one that forces the air in and also forces the air to go out. Oxygen then diffuses across the air sac through a single cell layer lining the air sac. and into the blood vessel. So when you look at our air sac here, this is our air sac. If you look at it, the air sac is made up of one layer of cell. So it is lined by one layer of cell. And if we have one layer of cell, that single cell layer allows easy diffusion of oxygen. So the oxygen which is coming into the air sac will easily diffuse in the one layer cell covering the lining of the air sac, and then it will enter into the blood vessel, which is the blood capillary. Then carbon dioxide will diffuse in the opposite direction. So we have seen that carbon dioxide is being brought by the blood. And when it is brought by the blood, now for it will diffuse in the opposite direction. It is diffusing out, yet oxygen is diffusing in. So they are diffusing in opposite direction. In mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians, oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged by diffusion in the lungs. So for those organisms like the mammals, like the birds, like the reptiles and amphibians, carbon dioxide and oxygen diffuse through the lungs. So they use the lungs, and they have got air sacs where diffusion of carbon dioxide and diffusion of oxygen is going to take place. Diffusion takes place through the surface of the gills. We have now the fish here. This is our fish. It has the gill cover here, which we call the operculum. Now, if you magnify this part of the head, it is going to look like this. And then we shall also remove the operculum so that we are able to see the gills. Now you will see that our fish is like this, and inside it has got the gills. Now these gills, when we magnify them, it has got the gill filaments. If we magnify them, this is how you are going to see the gill filaments. That's how they look like. And here our gill cover has been removed. So you know where the position of the gills are. They are here on the head. We are covered by the operculum. If you remove the operculum or the gill cover, this is how you are going to see the gills. And these gills, they have filaments. If you magnify the filaments, this is what you are going to see how they look like. That is, the fusion takes place on the surface of the gills. So the diffusion takes place on the surface of the gills there. Diffusion is a slow process. Diffusion is a slow process. Water is taken in through the mouth and passed over the gills, and then expelled through the gill cover. So our water is going to pass through the mouth and it enters inside. When it enters inside, then it will pass through the gills, and as it passes over the gills, then it will pass through the gill cover. The gill cover here is removed. So it will be passing out of the gill cover there, coming out. But it passed through the mouth and then it comes out through the gill cover after passing over the gills, entering through the mouth, pass over the gills, and then it passes out of the gill cover. The branching gill filaments offer a big surface area through which oxygen and carbon dioxide can diffuse. Now, when you look at our gills here, the gills here, you will see that these gills, when you magnify them, they have the gill filaments, and these gill filaments are further divided into small filaments. Now, when they are divided into those small filaments, it increases the surface area, meaning that all these areas, diffusion can take place in all those areas. So that one increases the surface area through which oxygen and carbon dioxide can diffuse. In this way, the total diffusion through the gills is greatly increased because of the increase in the branching of the gill filament. This one increases the surface area through which diffusion takes place. Therefore, diffusion is going to be greatly increased. The millions of air sacs in the lungs also vastly increase the area through which gases can diffuse. We saw earlier that the smaller branches, they divide and then they end up into very many air sac structures. And these ones, they increase the surface area over which gaseous exchange can take place, or where diffusion can easily take place. It is said that if all the air sacs were opened out and spread flat, they would occupy an area the size of a football pitch. So if you get the air sacs and open them up from the lungs and arrange them straight and flat, they can occupy an area of the size of the football pitch. Plants have no special organs for breathing. The plants, they don't have organs for breathing. They have to rely on diffusion for their supply of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Because they don't have facilities for gaseous exchange or the breathing, so they rely mainly on diffusion for the supply of their oxygen and the carbon dioxide. There are pores in the leaves and the stems through which gases diffuse. So let us look at our leaves here. You can see this is a leaf that has been cut through transversely. It has been cut through here. And we can see in the middle we have the vein which brings water. And then oxygen and carbon dioxide, they diffuse through pores in the epidermis. There are smaller pores here in the epidermis. Those pores, we call them stomata. It's where the gases diffuse into the leaf. Now, when you look here, we have our oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuse into the space between the cells. Using these pores on the surface of the leaf, or what we call the epidermal cells, it enters into the cells and then it diffuses into the space between the cells. Then now later it can diffuse into the cells. The plants respire all the time and they use up oxygen and they produce carbon dioxide. So always the plants are taking in carbon dioxide, and then they can also produce out oxygen. Oxygen can diffuse out. So respiration is taking place all the time. Therefore, oxygen is being used up and carbon dioxide is being produced. So when carbon dioxide is produced, of course, it is going to be used by the plant cells during the process of photosynthesis, and oxygen will always be diffusing in. That is during in dark time, during respiration. In the daylight, photosynthesis will use up carbon dioxide as fast as it is produced by respiration. So there will be no outward diffusion of carbon dioxide. So during daytime, there is no diffusion of carbon dioxide out of the plant, because the carbon dioxide which is produced in the cell by the process of respiration, that carbon dioxide is used by the plants during photosynthesis, which means that the plant during daylight, now again it will need carbon dioxide to diffuse into the plant. In daylight, carbon dioxide for photosynthesis will diffuse in and oxygen will diffuse outside. So we are going to have our carbon dioxide diffusing inside. That is during the daytime. Carbon dioxide will diffuse inside because it is going to be used during photosynthesis. And again, oxygen will be diffusing out. Oxygen will be diffusing out because oxygen is being produced in the process of photosynthesis. That is during the daylight. Similarly, oxygen produced by photosynthesis is used up by respiration. So some of the oxygen that has been produced by the process of photosynthesis can be used up by the plant in the process of respiration. So it's not that all the oxygen that has been produced during photosynthesis is going to be released out of the leaves. Some of it is going to be used in the process of respiration. In darkness, oxygen will diffuse in and carbon dioxide will diffuse out as a result of respiration. Now at night, what is going to happen? Carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out. That is at night. Why? Because inside the cell, there is respiration taking place. And when respiration is taking place in the cell, there is production of carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide, because it is dark, there is no light, therefore there is no photosynthesis taking place. Therefore, that carbon dioxide is not going to be used. Therefore, it will diffuse outside of the plant. But now, our plant now is carrying out respiration. Therefore, oxygen will diffuse and go inside the plant because oxygen now is needed by the plant cells to carry out respiration. Hello, my friends. Thank you very much for participating in diffusion. Please do like, share, and subscribe.